Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. Omicron might not be making as many people seriously ill, but local hospitals are reeling from an incredible surge in cases. And the next few weeks could push the system and the staff to the breaking point. In a minute, we'll talk with NPR's Will Stone, who visited Harborview Medical Center and saw firsthand how the COVID crunch is playing out. But first, let's get you caught up. There's more free COVID tests heading your way. State health officials said yesterday they'll launch their own website sometime in the next few weeks. Once it's online, you'll be able to request one testing kit per household, which will get you 4 or maybe 5 tests. They're still working that out. And be patient. They say the supply chain is still an issue, so there's a chance they'll occasionally run out. Just keep checking. Looks like the expanded 5G rollout won't snarl SeaTac Airport as badly as feared. Carriers are flipping the switch on expanded service this week, but there are concerns the signal could interfere with instruments on some low-flying planes, especially in bad weather, like we often have here. But the FAA said yesterday that it cleared most large aircraft to land at SeaTac. Smaller planes that make shorter trips are still being held up. So bottom line, if you're traveling, be sure to check ahead about any possible delays. And if your Starbucks barista happens to be vaccinated, it'll be their choice. The company backed off a previous requirement that its U.S. employees get vaccinated. In a memo to employees on Tuesday, Starbucks said it was responding to a ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court. Last week, the justices narrowly rejected the Biden administration's plan to require vaccines or regular COVID testing at companies with more than 100 workers. It looks like the Omicron variant could be peaking right now. And reports are it's not making people as seriously ill, but it is so infectious that we're seeing the biggest spike in cases of this entire pandemic. And even though people aren't getting as sick, a surge in patients is really hitting hospitals hard. Will Stone is a science reporter here in Seattle for NPR. He just visited Harborview to see the story for himself. Will, really good to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So Harborview is the only designated level 1 trauma center of its kind in the state, a very important hospital in the Northwest. Can you explain a little bit about what this means and how Harborview fits in?
Yeah, well, Harborview is vital for the entire Pacific Northwest because it is the place where if you're a burn victim, either adult or child, you get flown there, even from Idaho or other neighboring states. And so they need to maintain a certain level of capacity in the hospital. And that means that when they start to get filled with COVID patients, it puts a real strain on the system because they need to set aside room for other folks. And this is something that Harborview has a lot of practice with, kind of getting bigger, surging when they need to. And they are still having an extraordinary amount of difficulty right now in the current surge.
And we should say this isn't just about Harborview. This is the hospital where you live as well, listeners. Harborview, though, is very near capacity at this point, 90% full, which is actually down a bit from last month, curiously, when they were totally maxed out. But again, this is really putting a strain on the staff. What did you see when you visited, Will?
Yeah, well, I got to visit one of the acute care units, and I actually went to Harborview just over a year ago during that surge, and this was before we had vaccines available, anything like that. And at that time, I spent most of the time reporting in the ICU because we had so many critically ill patients on ventilators. This time, I spent the entire time on the acute care unit, which is for patients who aren't quite as sick, don't require to be on a ventilator, but you're still obviously sick enough to be there. And I mean, it was clearly busy. They, as you mentioned, they are at the most COVID patients of the entire pandemic at this point. And there was obviously a lot of stress because so many staff are out. And that has just made many nurses have to take care of more patients all at once. And the hospital's starting to do all these kind of gymnastics to make room for patients, whether that is, converting a surgery clinic to a COVID room or even a conference room to a COVID room just to make room. Because remember, it's not just that someone has COVID and they could be sick. It's that we need to make sure they don't spread it to other people in the hospital.
Yeah. And of course, caring for patients is one thing, but staff, they are so maxed out at this point. This is 2 years nearly into this pandemic. Will, who did you meet and what are they saying about having to show up every day at work dealing with this?
Yeah, I spoke to several nurses who were on this unit. One was named Isabel Norville, and she talked a bit about the patients that she's seeing this time around with Omicron.
A lot of them with Omicron are walkie-talkie. They're able to move about in the room as they please unless they have something else going on. They require oxygen less often. We still have the occasional patient that deteriorates a little bit with COVID, needing ICU care, but there are certainly far, far more patients on acute care than in the ICU.
So the interesting thing about this surge is that patients aren't as sick as they were earlier in the pandemic. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have high vaccination rates here. There's also data that show, in the U.S. and overseas, that it does not cause as severe illness as Delta does. But this does not mean the hospital isn't in a huge crisis. And this can be a little confusing sometimes. There are just so many more patients in there that it's made it incredibly difficult. Meanwhile, at the time when I visited, they were down about 600 healthcare workers across the UW health system. And you can just imagine when that happens, it gets very stressful. And while I was on the COVID unit, I also talked to a nurse named Jason Naki. He's been working there throughout the pandemic, and he is really feeling burned out, exhausted, and a little disheartened about the kind of work he has to do during a surge.
There's compassion fatigue, there's burnout, what makes me feel good about my job is delivering good care and being compassionate. And I feel like sometimes with our staffing ratios and just the sheer numbers that we're dealing with right now, it's very difficult to provide that sort of level of care that I want to, that's important to me, that's one of my values, right? So that's where it's maybe bedside nursing isn't going to be always in the cards for me. I thought it was, but maybe not.
Well, there is a significant patient crunch that's straining the system right now. And what does it mean for someone who doesn't have COVID but needs to go to the hospital for something different?
Yeah, well, it means they're going to probably wait longer than they normally would in the emergency room because the whole system is backed up. When you have hospital beds filled like you do at Harborview. I mean, John Lynch said we are a 413-bed hospital with over 500 patients. That gives you a pretty clear sense of how bad it is right now. And so when things get backed up in the hospital beds, then there's nowhere for folks who come through the ER to get admitted right away. And so then you end up having to move patients around, transfer people. It means that, if you come in right now, it's going to be harder to get the kind of care you want. And obviously, the governor has canceled non-urgent medical procedures because of concerns about capacity. If things continue, it could mean more dire situations like rationing of care and things like that. We're not at that point yet, but it seems that we are closer now than we have been throughout the pandemic.
The next couple of weeks are going to be stressful. Everybody is talking about how this is going to be a really challenging time. What are you watching for?
Well, we've seen that the Omicron surge has hit Western Washington, Seattle area faster than the eastern side of the state. And I think the real question right now is what happens as cases spread out more and we see the numbers go up across the region. Because, Western Washington has always been a kind of backup for the entire state. It's where people get transferred to from rural hospitals, smaller communities that don't have the same capacity or higher level of care. And if the cases keep going up, it's going to get really hard to figure out where in the system we have any slack. And that really could trigger some of these more, worst case scenarios like telling some patients you may not be able to get care right now. If the state were to move to a crisis standards of care, that would be a decision made by the entire state and implemented in a way that was equitable. So it wouldn't be like one part of the state got hit really hard while the other still had room. And it does seem like we are closer to that situation than we have been.
And that would be a first.
That would be a first for Washington State. Absolutely.
Yeah. Will Stone, Seattle-based science reporter for NPR, with a first-hand look at a very jammed-up situation at Harborview. Really appreciate your time and your reporting. Thanks, Will.
Of course. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Jason Pagano produced today's show. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.
Hey, Seattle Now listeners, I'm Libby Dankman, and I'd like to invite you to check out a new local show from KUOW. It's called Soundside. Every week, we'll bring you stories and conversations about the Puget Sound region and the people who call it home. You can catch Soundside live on KUOW Monday through Thursday at noon, or in your podcast app. Just search for Soundside. Thanks, and talk soon.